A question of presidential immunity. The US Supreme Court heard oral arguments in the historic case over whether former President Donald Trump can claim immunity from his federal election interference charges. Conservative justices, including Justice Samuel Alito, aggressively questioned the attorney representing Special Counsel Jack Smith.
If an incumbent who loses a very close, hotly contested election knows that a real possibility after leaving office is not that the president is going to be able to go off into a peaceful retirement, but that the president may be criminally prosecuted by a bitter political opponent, will that not lead us into a cycle that destabilizes the functioning of our country as a democracy? And we can look around the world and find countries where we have seen this process, where the loser gets thrown in jail.
It's not clear how much time the Supreme Court will take to hand down its opinion, but just listen to what the former president had to say on the matter.
So I heard the meeting was quite amazing, and the justices were on their game. So let's see how that all turns out. But again, I say presidential immunity, very powerful. Presidential immunity is imperative, or you practically won't have a country anymore.
And our resident Supreme Court expert, Joan Biskupik, joins us now to make sense of all of this. Joan, we heard one side there, which was Justice Alito. The opposite, of course, is that rather than a president perhaps not wanting to be president because they're afraid of what comes afterwards and the decisions that they've had to make, a blanket immunity, perhaps in the other extreme, creates a whole host of other problems. But the general consensus, I think, today perhaps was that the justices were more willing to hear Donald Trump's lawyers' arguments, perhaps, than people may have originally assumed.
You know, Julia, that's a perfect way to say it, because we all went in there knowing that John Sauer, representing the former president, had a tough hill to climb to say that there's absolute immunity. But they might not agree with him exactly on that kind of outsized view of how a president could be shielded, but they were with him in so many different ways, Julia. It was really riveting, nearly 3 hours, that when it comes right down to it, there are two things that are important here. First, what everyone cares about is what's going to happen to Donald Trump. Will he necessarily have a jury trial before the November 2024 election? And I think all the signals from this court are that no, this is not going to be an affirmation of the lower court ruling that said that Donald Trump lacked absolute immunity and that he should go to trial. I think what we're headed for here is definitely a reversal and sending it back to lower court. But there was enough back and forth about various issues that would apply to presidents more broadly, that I think this is going to be a very hard decision to write for future presidents. But the bottom line for this president is I just do not foresee a jury trial anytime soon. But on the larger question of whether presidents can be shielded from criminal liability, that's going to be worked out in the justices' private conference, and I think they're going to be narrowly divided on that. Chief Justice John Roberts, for example, was very skeptical of what the lower court did here, but I think it had to do with how the lower court did not, frankly, really delineate a lot of rationale to separate out official acts from private acts, didn't give the high court, in his mind at least, enough to work with. So that's why it would have to go back. So it's not that they were outright ready to say, you know, we believe in Donald Trump. It was more, we don't think the Justice Department has the best argument here, and we definitely don't think the D.C. Circuit, the lower court that considered this, has an argument that we can uphold.
Yeah, I mean, this is the highest court in the land. For people that don't live in the United States, they have to understand that every decision and the split of the votes of any decision is also going to be read in one way or another by the people watching this decision. What's to stop them saying, to your point, presidential immunity does apply in XYZ cases, and in ABC cases, we're going to push it back to the lower court and you have to fight amongst yourselves there. And your point about this all pushing everything back beyond the November 2024 election is important, but even just any signals before then, I think, matter too.
You know, that's exactly right. And one thing I should say, again, just thinking about Donald Trump for a second, you know, the lawyer representing Jack Smith, a man by the name of Michael Dreeben, kept trying to put before the justices, you know, so many of the allegedly fraudulent, obstructive acts that former President Trump had engaged in, the denial of the vote, all the activities that led up to the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. And these justices weren't having any of it. At least the majority was not having any of it. So, you know, the kinds of things that I think a lot of our audience, you know, are rightfully, you know, preoccupied by, what the accusations against the former president and the fact that he's running for re-election now, that was not foremost in the justices' mind. And they really did not, as I said, they brushed back those kinds of facts. So I think that, you know, looking for signals for what might happen this summer, I can tell you this. Given the arguments that we heard today, I do not anticipate any ruling by the Supreme Court before the end of June. Best case scenario for the Department of Justice's case would have been a ruling that totally affirms the lower court, or at least says a trial can go forward. But every signal, Julia, was a trial cannot go forward. That there are issues to iron out, you know, as you said, private versus official acts. Maybe another point that Justice Brett Kavanaugh brought up, and Justice Brett Kavanaugh tends to be a key justice at the center of this bench. You know, would a criminal statute that the president is charged under have to explicitly say that the president can be charged under this? So a lot of questions that, frankly, as I said, at least from the chief's point of view, should have been ironed out in the lower courts. The lower court judges, though, were emphatic in sort of highlighting the accusations and the fact that Donald Trump's claim was just too broad for absolute immunity. Julia.
Yeah, required calibration. And just to tie a bow on this, the key is that if he becomes president, the alleged federal crimes can go away. The state crimes, however, are far more difficult. Joan, fantastic to have you with us. Thank you for making sense of what can be incredibly complicated, quite frankly. Right.